Imagine looking at the devastation of the California wildfires, watching entire communities just turn to ash, and then someone taps you on the shoulder to tell you that carbon emissions had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Right, which is just, it's a wild thing to even consider.
It really is. Instead, they look you in the eye and say those fires are actually a direct, literal reflection of your impure soul.
Yeah, it is an incredibly jarring concept, honestly. I mean, we're just so accustomed to the standard metrics of the climate crisis, right? Like parts per million of carbon dioxide, rising sea levels, atmospheric data, all of that.
Exactly, the hard science we hear about every day.
Right. So encountering a perspective that completely bypasses the physical world, well, it feels like stepping onto another planet entirely.
It really does. So welcome to the deep dive. We are taking you into some intensely uncharted territory today because we have a document on the table that doesn't just argue with mainstream environmental science, it actually attempts to completely dismantle the scientific method itself when it comes to the climate.
Which is a massive undertaking, to say the least.
Whoa, absolutely huge. It's an essay from November 19th, 2018, authored by someone named Shemfeng. It was translated by Treasure and edited by Cower, and it operates under the incredibly bold title, The Only Way to Restrain Climate Deterioration.
Yeah, and the overarching mission for you today is to really examine the mechanics of this text. We are going to map out how this author takes the very real global anxiety surrounding the climate crisis, entirely strips away the physical causality, and then reconstructs it into a highly unconventional, deeply spiritual survival plan.
But before we go one step further, we really need to set a very firm boundary for this deep dive.
Yes, definitely. That is so important here.
Right, because this text contains some extremely intense, politically and spiritually charged claims. And we want to make it completely clear to you listening that we are not endorsing these viewpoints.
Exactly. We are not taking sides.
Yeah, we are not validating the theology, and we are certainly not taking a stance on the author's claims, left, right, or center. Our job today is strictly impartial. We are functioning as analytical guides, basically just breaking down the rhetorical architecture of the ideas exactly as they are presented in this original source material, simply to understand how the author builds his argument.
Right. Because by examining the architecture of this specific worldview, we can see how existential threats are sometimes processed and, repackaged. And the author builds this worldview by first aggressively clearing the board of literally everything we currently accept about environmental science.
Okay, let's unpack this because the text doesn't start with like a gentle critique of global policies.
No, not at all.
No, it comes out swinging.
Yeah.
The author, Xuefeng, explicitly calls out international treaties like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. He basically labels the belief that these agreements can stop climatic deterioration as an unrealistic and completely impossible joke.
The dismissal is absolute. It's total. And he extends that dismissal to the physical mechanics of climate change, too.
Wait, you mean like the actual pollution itself?
Exactly. The text explicitly waves away carbon emissions, land pollution, air pollution, water pollution, and even the methane gas produced by cattle and sheep.
Wow, so he just completely ignores all the standard physical drivers.
Yeah, in his framework, these are not causes. I mean, they're barely even symptoms.
So if we discard the entire scientific consensus, we are left with this massive void. And the author fills that void with the core thesis of the essay. He claims the true, singular root factor of climatic degradation is the human soul.
Which is such a massive pivot from standard science.
It really is. The text argues that humanity's collective state of consciousness actually determines the living environment. Essentially physical reality. So the weather, the temperature, the atmosphere is nothing more than a giant projection of human consciousness.
But what's fascinating here is the psychological pivot taking place. Like, let's look at the concept of the locus of control.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Well, in mainstream climate discourse, the locus of control often feels entirely external and, honestly, impossibly large. You, as an individual, cannot stop a multinational corporation from emitting carbon, right?
Right, which leads to a pretty profound sense of powerlessness for most people.
Exactly. And this text weaponizes that exact feeling. By shifting the root cause away from systemic industrial practices and placing it entirely onto the internal spiritual state of humanity, well, the author neutralizes the scientific method.
Ah, I see. So taking soil samples or measuring methane becomes completely useless if the actual disease is spiritual impurity.
Precisely. you're suddenly fighting a totally different war.
It's almost as if the author views the Earth as a giant mirror. Like if the reflection you see in the mirror is ugly and deteriorating, the pollution, the warming, the extreme weather, he argues that you shouldn't try to paint the mirror.
Oh, that's a really good way to visualize it.
Yeah, he compares standard environmental science, all those computer simulations and UN conferences, to literally taking a brush and painting the mirror to try and fix the reflection. Instead, he says you have to change the person looking into it.
Right, and that analogy perfectly captures the text's internal logic. Because the author believes standard science is just painting the mirror, he declares that data analysis, dedicated research, and the United Nations organizing international conferences to formulate programs, well, they're all entirely unnecessary.
Just a complete waste of time in his eyes.
Yeah, because they are treating the projection rather than the projector.
Which is staggering claim to make when the stakes are literally planetary survival. So if data and international conferences are useless according to this text, how exactly does the author propose we purify these souls? Because he explicitly states that this issue can be resolved very easily, right?
Well, yes, but the ease he speaks of is highly conditional.
Of course it is.
Yeah. The text states that this purification cannot be accomplished by the United Nations or by any state government. It places the burden entirely on the individual to involve themselves and purify their own souls.
Okay, so it's a personal journey then.
Well, here's the crucial catch. This purification cannot be done just any way you choose. It must be executed according to his specific theoretical directions and what he calls a new order of construction.
Okay, so it's his way or the highway. He introduces this new order of construction as a total replacement for traditional production and life modes, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
He wants to replace them with something he calls the new oasis for life, which was created by an entity or concept called life genuine. It's wild because he creates a perfectly closed logical loop.
Entirely closed.
Yeah. The planet is dying because human souls are impure, global institutions are powerless to fix it, science is looking in the wrong direction, so only individual spiritual purification can save us, provided you do it exactly according to his blueprints.
And that closed loop is essential for what comes next. Because once the author has successfully severed the reader's reliance on science and government, he fundamentally alters the timeline of the crisis.
Yeah, the essay takes a wildly sharp turn at this point because he argues that these international conferences won't work, and because he believes the global spiritual rot is already too deeply entrenched, the timeline just shifts drastically.
It becomes incredibly urgent.
Right. We move abruptly from how do we prevent climate change to how do we survive the immediate incoming apocalypse.
And the tone really shifts here, from philosophical to deeply frustrated. The author claims he's been shouting and appealing for at least a decade, but society has entirely ignored him.
Yeah, he sounds genuinely angry about it.
He does. He goes further, actually, stating that society has actively wrecked the theories and practical demonstrations of life genuine.
You can really feel the resentment bleeding through the text. And as a direct result of this perceived societal rejection, he pivots away from the idea of saving the planet entirely.
Right. The macro solution is just gone.
Exactly. He abandons it and focuses entirely on saving a small group of people as seeds for human continuation. Extinction is basically presented as the only alternative for everyone else.
This raises an important question about the architecture of apocalyptic messaging. How does an author convince a reader that this doom is not just theoretical but imminent?
How do they do it?
Well, they anchor the abstract prophecy to a tangible, recent nightmare.
Okay, let's pause and look at the rhetorical leverage happening here. He points directly to the 2018 fires near Paradise Town in California.
Yeah, which was just a horrific, very real tragedy.
Unbelievably tragic. And he uses that highly publicized real-world event as direct proof of his spiritual theory manifesting as physical disaster.
Right.
It intentionally shifts the reader from abstract worry about carbon ppm to immediate localized panic.
Exactly. By tethering his spiritual framework to a devastating event that people are already profoundly anxious about, he attempts to validate his extreme predictions. I mean, it creates a bridge between his invisible spiritual theory and a visible, terrifying reality.
And the escalation is just relentless from there. He explicitly writes, "No place in the world is safe."
He doesn't hold back at all.
Not even a little. He doesn't just predict more fires. He predicts massive floods where there are no fires, violent storms where there are no droughts, earthquakes, volcanoes, plagues, and extreme seasons.
It's basically every disaster you could possibly imagine.
Right. And to compound all those natural disasters, he throws in total societal collapse, predicting massive theft, murders, and wars. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, if you are reading this text? In a world where the author insists that literally nowhere is safe and society is imploding, what is the cognitive function of overwhelming the reader like this?
Well, functionally, it creates a psychological vacuum. The architecture of apocalyptic messaging always requires two opposing elements. You have the inescapable, multifaceted doom for the vast majority, and then you have the exceptionally narrow escape hatch for the chosen few.
So he's boxing them in.
Exactly. By listing every conceivable disaster, natural and human-made, the text corners the reader. Like, you cannot outrun a fire because you will drown in a flood. You cannot rely on your neighbors because they are collapsing into violence.
Wow, it really strips away any hope of conventional secular survival.
It does. The psychological divide is forged right there. You are either part of the doomed masses who ignored his warnings, or you are one of the seeds who will survive.
And once you've successfully convinced a reader that the world is an inescapable burning room, well, that psychological vacuum is begging to be filled. And the author steps right into that vacuum by introducing his ultimate escape hatch, which, unsurprisingly, centers entirely around himself and his specific organization.
Yeah, the transition from a misunderstood apocalyptic prophet to a self-proclaimed, unquestionable savior is executed with remarkable speed in this section of the essay.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The titles he bestows upon himself are staggering in their scope. I mean, Su Feng proclaims himself the messenger of the greatest creator.
Which is already a huge claim.
Right, but he doesn't stop there. He claims to be the incarnation of God, Buddha, celestials, sages, and saints, and caps it off by calling himself the greatest spiritual guide of our time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, synthesizing multiple major world religions into a single figurehead is a deliberate mechanism to claim absolute authority.
How so?
Well, he is not positioning himself as just a philosopher offering a new theory or a scientist presenting new data. By claiming to be the unified incarnation of Buddha, God, and all sages, he is demanding obedience to the ultimate, combined divine authority of human history.
So you literally cannot argue with him.
Exactly. He makes the mandate incredibly blunt. He says, those who want to live must follow my guidance.
Man, it is an absolute ultimatum, but the guidance he demands isn't just about meditating or, adopting a more peaceful mindset. It transitions from the ethereal to the deeply material very quickly.
It really does. It becomes very physical.
Yeah, he introduces a highly specific financial requirement. The text explicitly demands that followers must not hoard what they possess. Instead, they are instructed to dedicate your wealth to build this new mode of production and life, the new oasis for life created by Life Chanyuan.
And the mechanics of this new oasis for life are critical to understand. Like, this isn't a metaphor for finding peace in your heart.
No, not at all.
Based on the text's demands, this represents a literal, physical pulling away from mainstream society. It is the creation of communal enclaves that require hard capital to build.
It's structured almost like a highly localized spiritual carbon offset program. Like, in his framework, the planet is drowning in spiritual emissions, and the only way to buy carbon credits to ensure your survival is by liquidating your earthly assets and funding his specific real estate and lifestyle project.
That's a great analogy. But the juxtaposition of the spiritual and the material here requires a defensive maneuver from the author.
Oh, because he knows it looks like a cash grab.
Exactly. Almost immediately after demanding the dedication of wealth, he offers a preemptive justification. He writes, "Do not be short-sighted and accuse me of wanting to accumulate wealth by taking yours. I want nothing from you, but you need to use your wealth to save yourself."
Okay, that is a masterful piece of rhetorical judo.
Isn't it?
He tells the reader the apocalypse is here, he holds the only blueprint for survival, he requires their wealth to build it, and then he frames the surrender of their money as an act of self-salvation rather than a transaction. I mean, it's a jarring pivot from abstract philosophy about the earth reflecting human consciousness straight into a tangible financial mandate.
It synthesizes spiritual dread and material demand perfectly. But the ambition of this document doesn't stop at the individual follower's bank account.
Oh, right, it gets bigger.
Much bigger. Having claimed divine authority and demanded individual wealth, the author scales up his demands to the absolute highest geopolitical level.
Okay, wait, I'm stuck on this transition in the text. Earlier in the essay, he spends considerable time arguing that the United Nations is completely useless, right? Their conferences are a joke and they cannot solve the problem.
Right, he completely dismissed them.
But then, in his grand finale, he suddenly makes a direct plea for the UN to cooperate with him. How does that logic hold up within his own framework?
Well, it functions as the ultimate assertion of dominance. He isn't asking the UN to solve the climate crisis. He's asking the UN to facilitate his solution.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, he specifically asks the United Nations to hand over places on Earth which are disputed between nations and tribes. He wants these highly contested territories to be administered by his group so they can build these oases and safeguard what he calls the kindling materials of humanity.
Let me make sure I am visualizing the scale of this demand correctly. He wants the UN to step in and convince global superpowers to just hand over some of the most geopolitically sensitive, historically contested areas on the planet, places where nations are actively in conflict, so he can build his spiritual communes.
Precisely. By asking for disputed territories, he is rhetorically positioning himself not just as a spiritual leader, but as the ultimate geopolitical peacemaker.
That is incredibly bold.
It really is. It is a mechanism to elevate his personal authority above all global superpowers. Because think about it, if he can claim the lands that nations fight over, he proves that his new oasis for life supersedes all traditional human conflict and governance.
It reveals an extraordinary scale of grandiosity. He positions himself above the individual, above the entire scientific community, and ultimately above international law and territorial sovereignty.
Yes, and he closes the essay by basically slamming the door on any debate.
Right. He warns that it won't matter if people use their small minds to deny his warnings because they will eventually learn the truth, but it will be too late. The final ticking clock call to action is to have foresight and take action, and now W.
It is the final turn of the psychological screw. He has mapped out the doom, presented the singular escape route, demanded the resources to build it, and now applies the pressure of an expiring timer to force immediate compliance.
To bring this entirely together for you, the listener, we've really journeyed through a truly fascinating piece of source material today. We've examined how this document takes the very real, palpable global anxiety surrounding the climate crisis and basically uses it as raw material.
Yeah, it takes that fear and reshapes it entirely.
Exactly. It entirely discards the scientific consensus, bypasses discussions of carbon and infrastructure, and channels all that collective climate fear into a rigid manifesto. A manifesto that requires individual spiritual purification, complete financial dedication, and total adherence to a single self-proclaimed savior promising survival in his new oasis for life.
It really serves as a profound case study in how existential threats can be redirected. The text takes the fear of the external uncontrollable world, the changing weather, the encroaching fires, the rising floods, and transmutes it into a tool to enforce strict internal compliance and material surrender to a specific ideology.
And as a quick reminder as we wrap up, our exploration today was a strictly impartial deep dive into the mechanics of these extreme claims. We set out to unpack the architecture of the source material provided, mapping out how the argument is constructed from its rejection of science all the way to its geopolitical demands. We aren't endorsing the text, we're simply shining a light on the rhetorical gears turning beneath the surface.
Because even the most extreme texts operate on a specific, internally consistent logic. And understanding that logic is key to understanding how these movements attract followers in times of global stress.
So what does this all mean for us outside the context of this specific manifesto? Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about the author's core foundational premise, right? The idea that the physical environment is a direct projection of human consciousness.
Right, that was the mirror analogy.
Yes. We've spent our time analyzing how he weaponizes that idea to demand wealth and unquestioning obedience. But let's separate the raw philosophical concept from the apocalyptic financial pitch for just a second.
That is actually an excellent thought experiment to close on. If we isolate the author's foundational concept, the idea that our physical environment, we're actually a direct, literal projection of our collective internal consciousness.
Yeah, think about the mirror analogy we discussed at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Imagine that the physical world around you is literally just reflecting what is currently inside your mind.
It's an intense thought.
It is.
Yeah.
Take a look at your immediate surroundings right now as you listen to this. The room you're sitting in, the street outside your window, the overall state of the community you live in. If this theory were true, without the apocalyptic framing, what would that immediate environment say about your current state of mind?
It is a question that forces a radically different, highly internalized perspective on how we interact with the spaces we inhabit every day.
It completely flips the script on how we view our surroundings, something deeply personal to mull over as you go about your day. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly unique journey through the mechanics of climate apocalypse messaging. Keep questioning everything, keep exploring those hidden architectures, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.